Hello and welcome back to the Creating Value in Schools podcast, where we talk about how we can work more sustainably in schools. And today we're focusing, I'd say, on personal sustainability. What keeps us going in tough times, or what can help us navigate and come to terms with challenges we may encounter. And I'm delighted to have Viv Grant of Integrity Coaching with me. Welcome, Viv.
Thank you.
And yeah, Viv has many years of experience as both a coach and a head teacher, and has a real passion for supporting leaders born out of her own experience. And we'll come back to some of that. But where I wanted to start today is your book, Viv, Learning to Walk in the Dark. And when I first came across you talking about the book, the thing that really intrigued me was the art and how you discovered creativity as a way of sustaining you through a tough time. So, do you want to start by telling us a bit about that?
Yes, Liz. And whenever I'm asked that question, I suppose I always take a really deep breath because it takes me back to a time in my life that I hadn't expected, a time in my life that I call it winter now. And I think in the book, I talk about winter will take you by surprise. And so essentially, how I came to discover creativity in art was the result of a cancer diagnosis. It was August 2023. And the irony of it, I say the irony of it, was you introduced me by saying how I have this deep interest in well-being and sustaining school leaders. I had just started my PhD. And literally, I had finished a literature review around wholeness in school leadership. And what is it that school leaders need to attend to around this theme of wholeness? And then the literature talks about, for many leaders, there comes a point in time where they have an existential experience where everything they knew about themselves is actually taken away. It's a crisis of some sort. And it talks about how they rebuild themselves back together through the trauma. And that's how it was describing wholeness. I literally was about to put pen to paper.
Yes.
And I get a phone call saying you've got to come in for these emergency CT and MRI scans. And it was only in retrospect when I look back, because obviously, not obviously, but those scans then led to me being told that I had a rare form of cancer. But it's only when I had time and space afterwards and when I was recollecting, it's like, oh my goodness, Viv. It was like life was saying to you, okay, academically, Viv, yes, you can have this head knowledge and you can write about it.
Yeah.
But now you're going to have a real embodied experience of what wholeness means. And so it was one of, I think I can truly say hand on heart, it was one of the most surreal, scary experiences I've ever had. And going back to your question around art and creativity, in one of my post-op meetings, I'm still being looked after by the Royal Marsden. I'm in my monitoring phase now, but this is before the operation. I was in the waiting room and I just saw on the wall the list of services that they provided, and one of them was art therapy. I thought, oh, that would be really good. Maybe after the operation and so forth, I'll sign up for that. But when I inquired, they said they hadn't had an art therapist for 18 months. So I was like, oh, what am I going to do? Why have that up there? Get people's hopes up and then we can't do it. And so then I came home, and in passing, I mentioned it to my daughter and her best friend, Isha. Isha is an art student. And jokingly, really, Isha said to me, oh, Viv, I'll be your art therapist. And I didn't really think anything of it. I really didn't. And then about a week after surgery, I could barely walk, I'm still feeling really sad and sorry for myself because I had to have a hysterectomy. Isha came round, and her and my daughter, they decorated our front room with fairy lights and plants and soft music. And they said, Viv, come in here. And Isha, she bought little pots of acrylic paint and little acrylic canvases. And she said to me, Viv, just paint. And I'm just like, what? What do I paint? I can't paint. I never painted before. Why are you telling me to just paint, Isha? I said, I don't know what to paint. And she just said, Viv, don't overthink it. And I just started to paint. And, I still do feel a bit tearful when I think about it because it was such I suppose just a very deep experience. And
Mm.
I started to paint, and these images started to pour out of me. The first one was just of a tree, just naked in winter. And I didn't really think much of it, to be honest. But I'd done it. But then what happened was I went to bed and I woke up the next morning. It's like, I've got to paint. I've got to paint. I've got to paint. And another image came to mind and I painted. And then I'd go to sleep again and another image. And every morning, literally for about 3 weeks, I'm waking up and I've got to paint. I've got to paint. I've got to paint. And it was a really sort of surreal experience because my family, they were deeply worried because when I say it was a 3-week period because we were waiting to go back to the hospital to find out whether the cancer had spread. And so my husband, he's a bit of a worrier. He was really worried that, oh my God, whatever. But he said, Viv, in those 3 weeks, something magical happened, he said, and this is the room where I would paint in, actually, funny enough. This is a room, used to be my daughter's bedroom, but we decorated stuff. So it's the smallest room in the house, and this is where I would come and paint. And he said, a peace descended over the house. You would just retreat into that room. You'd maybe show up for lunch or something. You'd go back in. And then at the end of the day, you'd come out and you'd say, look what I've painted. And everyone else would be surprised. I would be surprised. And sometimes I'd just sit and I'd look at them because I didn't really have any understanding or words. All I knew was that when I painted, time just changed and it morphed. And I had no sense of, how time was passing. I was given like a whole raft of painkillers when I came out of hospital. I only took one in that whole time. And I'm sure it was the impact of the painting and it taking me to a very different place in myself. So that's how it all came about, Liz.
Yeah, gosh, thank you for sharing, Viv. That's quite what an experience.
Yeah.
And I guess, yeah, something that's coming through to me in
Mm.
reading the book, which I've
Yeah.
dipped into and now I've sort of gone back to the beginning on,
Mm.
is that is a kind of invitation to something deeper, a soul experience, a connection. And I found that, yeah, that to me is interesting because I suppose, yeah, we live so much in our heads. And I think in the
Yeah.
book you mentioned, there's the rational self. What do I need to know about this? And what do I need to do here? But actually, it feels to me like it
Mm.
was in allowing almost something more magical or
Mm.
soulful that enabled you to
Mm.
come to terms with this experience.
Yeah. Most definitely. As I was listening to you there, Liz, what I was reminded of, when you talk about going to a deeper, more soulful place. When we went to the hospital and we were waiting hours and hours and hours before I was wheeled into the operating room because they told us I was going to be the first one to be operated
Oh,
on. So we got
yeah.
there really, really early. And then
Oh,
when I got there, they said, oh, actually, because of the type of cancer that you've got and the level of risk, you're going to be the last one to be operated on. And then you're going to be in ICU. And so luckily I had bought some reading material with me. And one of the books I'd bought was by John O'Donoghue. He's no longer alive, Irish poet. And it was his Book of Blessings. And there was one poem in particular that I kept being drawn to, and it's called A Blessing for a Friend on the Arrival of Illness. And there was one line that I couldn't shake, and it just kept saying something along the lines, may you find within yourself a gracious hospitality to what is difficult, painful, and unknown. And again, I didn't know at the time, but those words, they just kept coming back to me. And actually, in my recovery, I came home and I actually incorporated them into a painting. And it's almost, well, obviously, I think with his work and the way in which he wrote, he had this sense of how we are drawn into a deeper relationship with soul, with the wiser part of ourselves. And I look back now and I think that's what he was talking about. How to find a courageous hospitality with what's difficult, painful, and unknown. It's not through here. We don't do that through here. It's through our heart, it's through our soul, and it's through, often it is through crisis. Again, there's another storyteller, Michael Mead, and he talks about the gold is found beside the wound. And yeah, so when you're reflecting back to me, that's where my mind just went to that. I do believe, and, it's in my own life experience, the work that I do with school leaders, that we all have a deep inner wisdom. We all do. But because of the busyness of life, we don't always necessarily find ways to access it.
I think so. That's right. And also, I think, particularly maybe in like Western culture, our
Yeah,
society, we always
yeah.
want to, we don't want to dwell on the difficult stuff. And we want to move on. Let's think about the positive. Let's put it away. And so, yeah, that line in the poem, that idea of a courageous hospitality towards
Mm,
what is difficult and painful is quite unfamiliar, actually, isn't it? To a
yeah.
lot of us, we're not used to that way of thinking.
I think there's what I would say, it's almost like an emotional immaturity. It stunts our growth. And again, because, my background is in headship and the work that I do is with school leaders, is very much for me, it's this thing, we ask for our leaders to be wise. We ask for them to have the capacity to make wise decisions. But the fiction that goes alongside that is that you get there by brushing things aside, by being strong and resilient and pretending everything is okay. But again, another thing that's happened, through the cancer and coming out on the other side, I've really turned to nature and learning and just really leaning into what nature has to say to us. And I do feel that is again through the paintings, because it was just the trees. I mean,
Mm.
a lot of my
Sorry.
paintings are rooted in nature and trees, and this sense that, we look at oaks and we admire them, don't we? We admire these great big ancient oaks that stand in our parks, in our woodland. But again, those oaks, that strength, that majesty that we see doesn't happen overnight. They face storms, the same that we do, but their roots grow deeper and deeper with each storm. The bark, it gets stronger and stronger with each storm. We're not separate from nature. And if we can see ourselves in relation to what nature has to say to us about what it means to be alive, even, and that, that difficulties and challenges are a part of the experience of being alive, then perhaps we'll have a different way of engaging with life, with the challenges of leadership.
Absolutely. And something I did also want to mention is, yeah, the cancer that you had is one that is particularly prevalent among women of color. So
Yeah.
I imagine, did this draw your attention even further to inequalities around health and race? And I feel it's something, isn't it? Perhaps recent years, COVID experiences and things have drawn
Mm,
our attention
mm.
to.
Yeah. Yes, most definitely. And again, it was all part of the shock of the whole
Mm.
experience. One, it was a shock just to be told you've got cancer. Then two, a shock, it's my husband and myself actually through our own research to discover that it was one that was common in women of color. But then I think, and three, this goes to the inequalities and so forth. Those who were treating me didn't want to know. They really didn't, can I say the phrase, didn't care.
Oh.
And that was really, it's very difficult for myself, particularly because, as well as the work that I do around leadership, I do a lot of work around race. And so in my work, I'd often spoken about how race impacts people of color. And I'd spoken about it, in ways in which I often related to my own school experiences and the racism that I experienced at school. And now I was having another sort of experience of how race
Mm.
impacts the lives of people of color. I can't tell you again, Liz, just the impact that had. There's a book by an author, I'm gonna forget her name now. I think it's Joyce de Grey. I think it's called I can't remember now, but something, slave syndrome, something like that. But it's about the post-traumatic slave syndrome. That's what it is.
Mhm.
And then, she talks in it about intergenerational trauma and the markers that are left upon our bodies. And again, if I'm honest, it's really something I'm still working through. Quite obviously, at the time, I was seeing a therapist, and tentatively, I would say to her, I'm going to read this book, or there's these other books that have come into my awareness, but I don't know how strong I feel right now. And I think I'm still on that path. There are still some books that I know would give me a greater maybe mental understanding, rational understanding, but it's a lot. It's a lot.
Mm.
Yeah. And I very much, as much as, I know I was under one of the best hospitals in terms of being treated, there was still very much a sense that you're kind of like a number, really. And this is how they treat cancer. So you have to go by the book in terms of what they say. And it doesn't matter. Well, I didn't feel it mattered really whether my ethnicity or so forth. So yeah.
Feel like it's something else. Oh, I don't know. Yeah, part of that tree, that growth, isn't it? I don't know.
Yeah.
As time goes on, it's something to read, think on more. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think where I am quite right now on my own journey, it is that sense of yes, I know that my art, my creativity, it will help me through. There's that inner knowing, there's that sense of I'm so funny. I'm looking at a painting. I might as well just get it. I'll explain it more
Yeah.
now. But one of the things I was going to say, as well as trees, fire was very present in my paintings then, and in my paintings post then. So this is one that I wasn't really. Again, I was painting it, and actually, I'm looking on the back, and I've called it Tree of Life. But when I'm painting, very often I don't know what I'm going to be painting. It just sort of comes out. And then I've, looked at the symbolism around fire, and that is all to do with purification. It's all to do with that sense of creating, leveling the ground for new life to come forth. And so I'm kind of like accepting that life has put me on this path now where I suppose it's inviting me, I would say, to different ways of knowing and different ways of dealing with the complexities of life.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. Yeah, fire, rebirth. See, it's a technique, isn't it? Like I think in
Mm,
Australia,
yeah,
Aboriginal
exactly.
culture,
Yes,
fire is actually a way of managing the land, isn't it? Allowing other
exactly.
things to come forth.
For details about this book and other authors mentioned, check out the links in the show notes. Coming up, we're going to hear from Viv about how her experiences have influenced her work with school leaders, what life might be like if Ofsted inspectors drew on their inner wisdom, and why we all need to take off the superhero t-shirt and get connected. Back to the show.
And so we've mentioned courage, creativity.
Yeah.
And in the book, there are some other C's as well, aren't there? So tell us
Yeah.
more about the 5 C's.
Okay, so the 5 C's, they are curiosity, compassion, courage, connection. Maybe I can't remember the fifth one. You'll have to
I'm
remind
going to
me.
commitments,
Commitment.
curiosity, commitment, courage, compassion, connection.
Okay.
Yeah.
And they came about, again, it wasn't rational. Again, it was because I didn't intend to put a book out. Those paintings were meant to be private and they were meant to be just for me alone. And it was only when I returned back to work that I did a small workshop with a few head teachers. And I thought, I'm going to be brave. I'm going to do some creativity with them and I'm going to introduce some of the paintings. And they were like, Viv, you know what you have to do, don't you? And I'm like, no. I'm like, Viv, you know what you have to do, don't you? Like, no. But then I just thought, Viv, you got to walk your talk, and if other people are saying that these paintings and the way in which I engage with them and talk about them can be of help, then actually, Viv, you owe it to them and you owe it to what you're about to put them out. And so when I started to put the book together, I started to think about what was my process. How did I get through that time? And then I realized there were certain qualities that I actually were nurtured within me over that time. So curiosity, for example, I think to begin with, if I'm really honest, I was in so much shock, but I was also quite critical. And what have I done to my body? Is this my fault? Oh my goodness, what have I done? And then over time, I realized that that changed to curiosity. I was no longer being critical, but I needed to be curious. And again, going back to the John O'Donoghue quote, so what is it? Why have you come into my life? What is it that you want to show me? So I had to develop a new way of being, a new relationship. And then the C that's around connection, I realized when I came out the other side of it all, that I had a deeper connection to what I feel is my life's purpose, which is around being in the education sphere, really enabling school leaders to be the best versions of themselves. But I felt I deepened my understanding around well-being, as I said at the very beginning, this whole thing around wholeness and what it means and how to cultivate wisdom, that had grown. I felt a deeper connection to the natural world, to the world around me, and recognizing that I was just as much a part of it, and that there was so much, and for me in particular, it has been around trees. There was just so much that I could learn from nature and being in deep connection and relationship with nature. So really, yeah, those 5 C's, they just came about by me just pausing and reflecting, okay, so what were the qualities, Viv, that enabled you to travel through, this dark night of the soul, really?
Yeah. And yeah, going back to, I think it's, again, I would say, I feel like in Western society, often we sort of talk about man versus nature. And I think that's one of those problematic things, is it doesn't help us really take care of the environment, care of the climate, because of course we're part of nature. We're natural too, aren't we? We're part of that.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it's really interesting that that was a path you've been down.
Yeah.
And it kind of takes me to, one of the things I'm really interested about your experience with the head teachers, because again, I feel like school's a place of, I don't know, action, busyness, intellect.
Yeah.
And so I'm wondering how, those head teachers who maybe you've talked to about, actually, let's talk about art or creativity or expressing something different. How has that gone down? Or is it a case of, because I imagine it could be a case of, look, I'm a busy, overwhelmed head teacher. I haven't got time to pick up a paintbrush.
Yeah, it's been a really lovely experience, if I'm honest. I think what I have found over the years is that in terms of education, there are no cookie type, we have the sort of stereotype of a head teacher. But I know from the ones who are called to our work, they're already on this path, whether we call it soul awakening or wanting to lead differently. So one of the things that we did, or that I did coming out on the other side, we created a program called Learning to Walk in the Dark, specifically for head teachers, where I take the lessons that I have learned, and it's just a short, runs over, I think 6 months, modules that explore aspects of learning to walk in the dark. And I'll never forget, so we did the pilot last year. And I'll never forget one head teacher, and I think it was just about in the first or second session, she said, I used to write poetry. I've forgotten I used to do that. I'm going to go back to doing that. And so what I have found is, as I said at the beginning, we all have the capacity to tap into another way of knowing, this deep inner wisdom. And it's about what I have found, it's about creating spaces. And I always say to heads, just take off that superhero cloak. It's not needed here. Just come as you are. And it can take heads sometimes a bit of a while. Think, does Viv really mean it? It's like, oh, she does. And then you just see this beautiful unfolding. And it's so lovely. Again, I can think of another head last year. And I think it was towards the end of Viv. I think I did a session with them on intuition and just trusting that quiet inner voice. Because again, for head teachers, you've got so many other voices saying, do this. And I said, it's just so interesting because before, I wouldn't have felt brave or strong enough to talk with my SLT about trusting their own inner wisdom. And when we come together as a team, how important that is when we're doing our decision making. But now I feel brave enough to do that. Again, I can think of another head who before, and actually he was brilliant actually, because he probably was not what I would say the typical IC head teacher. He had been through the wars, and what education had taught him was, you're the super head. You don't ever show anyone vulnerability. And I'll take my hat off to him. But something inside must have been saying to him anyway, this is the space that you need. Because it really was so enlightening for him. It's like, oh, I can be different. I can hold the role in a different way. And it was beautiful. It was so beautiful, what I would say, to see him come into a different relationship with himself that allowed him to engage with his emotions, that allowed him to recognize that he also had a deep inner wisdom as well. And that if he let go of, the sort of stereotyped notions of how to hold headship, he could hold it in a way that was more generative and supportive of himself. So what I find is the heads who are on this journey, they find us.
Which is good, isn't it? Because part of me feels, as I know you've been doing this work for a long time, and sharing this message of, the heads got to take that superhero t-shirt off. In the end, it's not going to serve you. I always wonder if you ever feel like, do you feel, is this message ever going to get through? Are things changing?
I think the older I get, I hope I get a bit wiser. And I'm sort of, kind of accepting in some respects of where we are in education, and an understanding that really that those who make the policy guidelines and so forth, they haven't necessarily done their inner work. And so therefore, it will mean that we will have a very reduced, I should say, or diminished sense of what well-being is. And I just think, well, Viv, you know what you believe. You know what integrity believes. So if you can just be one light and keep that light shining as brightly as you can, then that's the best that you can do. So for me, it's like, I accept that, but it means, so when you said, frustrated, I think maybe in my younger days, I might have got a bit frustrated, but now I don't. Now I'm just kind of like, okay, this is the landscape, but I know what is mine to do, what is integrity's work to do in that landscape. And I know that the heads who would benefit from our message, who benefit from our services, they will find us. They will find us.
Yeah, I guess it's yes. What is the change that I can be?
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah. Although this is putting, like, I know, nice ideas in my head of what would it be if Ofsted inspectors were drawing more on their inner wisdom and intuition.
We could all dream, couldn't we? And how different that would be. Can you imagine? Can you imagine school leaders saying, yeah, Ofsted, come in, it'd be so wonderful.
Well, yes. Thank you. And I was interested too for maybe leaders out there who are getting in touch with things and want to share or write things as well themselves. Tell us about the experience, because you touched on a bit of the experience of putting this book together. How was it? And I noticed you haven't gone down a like traditional publishing route. So anything you'd like to share with us about that?
I think you just really need, for me, it was a case of, why it came out through integrity is because I just wanted ownership of it, to be honest.
Yeah.
And I knew how I wanted to use it. And also in particular, the paintings, there was something particular around the paintings and the way, we worked with a professional typesetter, as it were, and someone who works with images and so forth. So we'd found a good person to work with. And I suppose I just wanted greater artistic control, as it were. But I think the whole process, really, it's a very personal process. And this, as I said, this book I never, ever planned. Like, my first book, Staying Ahead, that was planned and I knew why I was writing that and so forth. This one, it wasn't planned. But I suppose the only advice I would give is really just be clear about your reasons as to why you want to write, the reasons as to why you want to put it out in the world. And you can make that decision as to whether you go through a traditional route or whether, you publish it yourself. I think there are so many avenues that are open to people out now who want to get their messaging out into the world. And I think individuals can decide on which route would best suit them and the purposes as to why they're deciding to put something out.
Yeah. No, thank you. Yeah. And I definitely, in looking at the book, really appreciate, I can see it is really carefully laid out and how things are positioned and the quotes and the space too. The space, isn't it? This is definitely a book for people to interact with. It's
Exactly. Yeah,
it's
yeah,
it's
yeah.
something to read with a pen or pencil in your hand.
Mhm.
Okay, so because there's lots of things that you've read and inspired, and again, I think one of the lovely things about the book is it's an invitation. Because John O'Donoghue, that wasn't a name I knew, but there's people there to then go and explore further. But yeah, tell us, what have you been reading or listening to recently that's
So
inspired
a
you?
lovely book that I've just finished reading is The Island of Missing Trees. This was recommended to me actually. I just finished, I was speaking at a conference and a delegate came up to me afterwards and said, there's a book you've got to read. Because when I was talking
Yeah,
about trees and everything. She goes,
yeah.
you've got to read this book, Viv. You've got to read this book. And this was the book that she recommended to me. And she was so right. For a variety of reasons, she was so right, really, in terms of recommending it to me. But I think, I think a lot of it is still sort of resting with me, really, because we're living in a time of conflict now, aren't we?
Absolutely.
And this is based upon, relationships during a time of conflict. And I think also what I love about this book, and I think about this a lot actually with the times that we are in, when we look at what's happening, and I think, how is this impacting the natural world? We're seeing all of this happening, and I really do think about, the ocean and the trees and the birds and their habitat. And I suppose what I love about this book is that, it's the fig tree that is also one of the key narrators in it, talking about issues around displacement, but also giving a perspective in terms of land and what happens. So yeah, there's a lot of the book that is still resonating with me and working its way through me, but I'm so glad for the recommendation.
Oh, yeah, it's a beautiful book. I read it too. I actually read it when I was on holiday in Cyprus
Oh,
because it's
wow.
based in Cyprus, isn't it? And so that
Yeah.
was wonderful. But you say, but it really does, it help encourage us to have that
Mm,
different understanding of
mm,
communication and trees and our connections to the world and
mm.
different kinds of knowing.
Yeah. And as I said, one of my 5 Cs, we've got to be connected. I think a lot of what we're experiencing in the world right now is because this sense of disconnection and individualism. And if we all realize the extent to which we are connected, perhaps, we wouldn't be where we are right now.
Absolutely. Yes. Thank you, Viv. So maybe just as a simple thing we can all do today is get outside, go for a walk, maybe go find some trees. Great. Thank you so much, Viv, for sharing with us. And we will, all the books and things we've talked about today, we'll make sure I put details of those in the show notes.
Lovely. Okay. Thank you, Liz.
A big thank you again to Viv Grant for sharing her experiences with us of learning to walk in the dark. And thanks to you for listening. If this episode has resonated or inspired you to take action, let us know in the comments. And for another take on leadership through challenging times, check out episode 23 with Paul K. Ainsworth on crisis recovery in schools. Be back with you soon.